Hey everyone, ready to heat things up in your job hunt? Today we're taking a deep dive into how to absolutely crush your next soldering interview.
That's right. Whether you're just dipping your toes into the soldering world or you're practically a soldering superhero, we've got the insights to help you stand out.
We're tapping into RoleCatcher's awesome career guide and their massive database of interview questions to make sure you're more than ready.
Think of it like this. It's not about having the answers handed to you. It's about really understanding what those hiring managers are looking for and how you can show off those incredible soldering skills.
Okay, let's jump right in with a question that's almost guaranteed to come up. Can you explain the difference between lead-free and lead-based soldering techniques? Now, this might seem like a total no-brainer, but nailing this question shows you're not just good with a soldering iron, you get the bigger picture of safety and, keeping things environmentally friendly.
Exactly. And this is where RoleCatcher's AI can give you a real advantage. Imagine this, you put in the specific job description and bam, RoleCatcher customizes your response. Let's say this company really cares about the environment. RoleCatcher might suggest highlighting how lead-based solder impacts the planet, and then you swoop in with your knowledge about lead-free options.
Whoa, that's amazing. Talk about making a great first impression. So let's say the interviewer throws in a curveball like, what are some of the challenges of working with lead-free solder and how do you handle them? What would you say to that?
Don't sweat it. This is your moment to shine. You could say something like, well, lead-free solder, it usually needs a higher temperature to work properly, which, can be a bit tricky if you're dealing with components that are super sensitive to heat. So to make sure everything goes smoothly, I always double check the temperature on my soldering iron. Oh, and I use the right techniques, of course, like preheating the board.
That's awesome. You turned a challenge into a way to show off those problem-solving skills. All right, let's switch gears to a question that's super important in today's tech-driven world. What is your experience with surface mount technology?
Oh yeah, this one's huge. Surface mount technology is everywhere you look these days. So it doesn't matter if you're a total pro or just starting out, showing you're eager to learn is key.
Totally. And this is where those personal projects, the ones you tinker with in your free time, or even just mentioning a class you took, can really make you stand out. Now, I'm curious, how would RoleCatcher's AI help someone tailor their answer to this question if they were, say, applying for a job at a company that makes smartphones?
That's a fantastic question. I think RoleCatcher's AI would probably suggest you highlight any experience you have with soldering those teeny tiny components, like the ones you'd find in a smartphone.
Hmm.
It might even suggest you mention that you're familiar with the specific industry standards, especially those related to, well, you guessed it, making smartphones.
Okay, so it's all about making that connection between your skills and what the company really needs. Makes perfect sense. Okay, let's move on to quality control with this question. How do you ensure your soldering work meets quality standards?
This is where you get to talk about your process. It's not enough to just say, hey, I do good work, right? You got to walk them through your approach. So you can be like, well, I'm pretty meticulous when it comes to using the right soldering iron tip for each and every joint. Plus, I always double check my work under magnification. Got to make sure there are no cold joints or bridging.
I love how detailed and specific that is. It really shows you're not just going through the motions, you're all about delivering amazing work.
You got it. And hey, while you're at it, don't forget to mention that you know the industry standards like the back of your hand. Just casually drop something like, oh, and of course I'm well versed in the IPCA 610 standard, which by the way is basically the holy grail for soldered connections, and I always make sure my work is up to par with those guidelines.
Okay, that sounds super impressive. You make it sound so easy. So what if, after that question, the interviewer wants to dig a little deeper into your, soldering detective skills, how you solve those tricky soldering mysteries? Let's say they ask, have you ever run into a really difficult soldering problem and how did you solve it?
Mhm.
What advice would you give for tackling that one?
Ooh, pick a specific example. Like maybe you had a component that just wouldn't cooperate, or you had to deal with a joint configuration that felt like it was designed by a puzzle master. Then walk them through how you cracked the case. How did you even know there was a problem in the first place? What steps did you take to figure it out? And of course, how did you save the day with your awesome soldering skills?
It's like you're telling a story, but instead of a knight in shining armor, it's you, the soldering hero. It's engaging, it shows off your awesome brain power, and it highlights that you're all about learning from your mistakes. Now, I know we touched on this earlier with the lead-free soldering question, but we can't forget about safety. Safety is absolutely crucial in the soldering world. How would you recommend someone answer this question? How do you make sure your soldering work is safe and follows all the safety rules?
This is where you show them that you're not just looking out for yourself, but for everyone around you. Talk about the specific safety protocols you follow religiously, like wearing all the right gear to protect yourself, keeping your workspace so clean and organized it would make Marie Kondo proud, and of course knowing exactly how to handle solder and those fumes responsibly.
It's all about showing them that you don't just know the rules, you live by them.
Yeah, yeah. You could even say something like, I always make sure my workspace has amazing ventilation to keep those fumes in check, and I'm super careful about following the proper procedures for getting rid of solder waste.
Now that's how you show them you're committed to a safe and healthy work environment. Okay, so far we've covered some of the big technical stuff about soldering. But before we move on, I want to take a closer look at how RoleCatcher's awesome AI-powered feedback can actually help you polish your interview answers. We'll get into that right after a quick message. So before the break, we were talking about how RoleCatcher can actually listen to you, practice your answers, and then give you feedback. That's incredible. What kind of things does it zero in on?
It's seriously impressive. It can tell if you're talking a mile a minute, if you're using too much technical jargon that might go over people's heads, or even if your answers are, all over the place.
It's like having your own personal coach in your pocket, helping you sound smooth and confident. That's insanely valuable. I mean, it's one thing to know all the soldering stuff, but it's a whole other ball game to actually explain it clearly when you're in a nerve-wracking interview.
You hit the nail on the head. Speaking of nerve-wracking, let's tackle a question that tends to make people squirm a little. Have you ever made a mistake while soldering? And how did you deal with it?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. It's so tempting to just pretend you're perfect, but I have a feeling honesty is the way to go here.
You're absolutely right. Listen, we've all been there. Everyone makes mistakes, especially in a field like soldering where, let's face it, it's all about those tiny details. The key is to show them that you can own your mistakes, you can learn from them, and most importantly, you know how to prevent them from happening again.
So what's the best way to handle that question? Can you give us an example of what a really good answer would sound like?
Sure, you could say something like, well, there was this one time when I was working on this super intricate circuit board and I accidentally bridged two pins together. I realized what I'd done right away, took a deep breath, and stepped back to assess the situation. Then I grabbed a desoldering braid and carefully corrected the connection.
That's a perfect example. It shows you're not afraid to admit when you mess up, and you've got the skills to fix things. Okay, let's shift gears to a question that really puts your knowledge and adaptability to the test. What's your experience with soldering in different environments, like places with really high temperatures or crazy humidity?
This one is all about proving you get how much the environment can actually impact soldering. Even if you haven't worked in those exact conditions, you can still impress them by showing you've at least thought about it.
That's right. Like you could talk about using the right solder for different temperatures and humidity levels, or even how you'd go about researching the best techniques for those situations.
Exactly. It shows you're proactive and always thinking ahead, which is a huge plus.
Oh,
And it's also a great opportunity to mention RoleCatcher's Career Compass feature. You could slip in something like, I've been checking out RoleCatcher's Career Compass to learn more about certifications related to, working with different materials or in tricky environments.
that's so smart. It shows you're serious about growing your skills and staying ahead of the curve. Okay, let's tackle another question that can be a bit tricky. What's your experience with hand soldering versus machine soldering?
This one's all about showing off your versatility. A lot of soldering jobs these days want you to be comfortable with both hand soldering and using those fancy soldering machines. So it's all about highlighting your experience with both methods.
Even if you're more of a pro at one than the other.
Totally. It's important to be honest, but you also want to emphasize that you're a fast learner and always up for a challenge. You could say something like, well, I've definitely got more experience with hand soldering, but I'm really eager to dive deeper into the world of machine soldering. I've been reading up on all the different soldering machine technologies, and I can't wait to get some hands-on experience.
I love how you phrased that. Okay, let's say you're trying to land a job with a company that specializes in aerospace electronics. How would RoleCatcher's AI help you tailor your response for that specific industry?
That's where RoleCatcher really shines. It might suggest highlighting any experience you have with those super delicate components or working with those special alloys they use in aerospace stuff. It might even give you a nudge to mention those industry-specific certifications, like the ones from the JSTD 001 standard, which is all about soldering for those high-reliability electronics.
That is so incredibly helpful. It's like having a secret decoder ring to figure out exactly what those job descriptions really mean.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of things that aren't always obvious, let's talk about networking. Networking is often overlooked, but it can make a world of difference, even in a super technical field like soldering.
Networking can definitely feel a little intimidating, especially if you're not exactly the most outgoing person. What advice would you give to our listeners who might be a bit hesitant to put themselves out there?
Yeah, for sure. It's like, where do you even begin? It can feel like a whole other job sometimes. Well, RoleCatcher actually has some really good tips for this. They recommend checking out online forums or joining those LinkedIn groups, the ones specifically for soldering. It's a way to connect with other soldering pros, ask questions, and hey, you might even stumble across some job openings. And the best part, it's all online. No awkward small talk required.
That's a great starting point. It's like getting your feet wet before you dive headfirst into those big industry
You
events.
know it. And hey, once you feel ready to level up your networking game, think about attending those industry conferences or those massive trade shows. Those events are like gold mines for meeting potential employers, checking out all the latest soldering tech, and just expanding your network.
And if all that still sounds a bit overwhelming, remember, even just chatting with someone who loves soldering as much as you do at your local electronics store can lead to something amazing. You never know what opportunities are waiting around the corner. Okay, before we wrap things up, I wanted to swing back to a question that often pops up near the end of an interview. Do you have any questions for me? Now, this might seem like a throwaway question, but a lot of people fumble it. So, what's the best way to handle it?
This is your chance to show that interviewer you're genuinely interested and that you've done your research. Don't be shy about writing down a few questions while they're talking. You could ask something like, what are some of the biggest challenges the soldering team is tackling right now? Or what opportunities are there to learn and grow within the company? Show them you're thinking long term.
That's a great way to show them you're not just looking for a job, you're looking to be part of the team and make a real impact. Well, we've covered a ton of ground today, from nailing those tricky interview questions to unleashing the power of RoleCatcher's AI tools. As we put a bow on this deep dive, what are some final words of wisdom you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Preparation is key. RoleCatcher gives you all the tools you need to really understand the ins and outs of the soldering industry, know what questions to expect, and figure out how to answer them in a way that makes you shine. But here's the thing. It's up to you to put in the effort, to practice those answers, to research companies, and most importantly, to walk into that interview feeling like the soldering superstar you are.
So true. And hey, even if that first interview doesn't go exactly as planned, don't let it get you down. Every interview, every conversation, it's all a chance to learn and grow.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's all about getting better every step of the way and never letting go of those soldering dreams. And one last thought before we go, as you're mapping out your soldering journey, think about how this field is constantly changing. Automation is becoming a bigger deal, so how do you see the role of a skilled solderer evolving? Lots to ponder there.
Ooh, that's a great question to leave everyone with. Thanks for all the awesome insights today. I learned so much.
Happy to be here.
And to our amazing listeners, until next time, happy soldering. And remember, you've got this.